Erudition is the next stop I'm making on our journey through the various classes of Honkai Star Rail. Erudition was my next choice because it spends a decent portion of the early game in an odd place meta-wise, but there's also one other reason that I wanted to do Erudition next. It's because today's story has, well, it has a protagonist. A real hero's journey, if you will. Now, we won't meet our hero immediately, but once we do, that's when our story truly begins. Let's start with revealing our launch day cast for Erudition. It feels like Himiko is a good place to start. She's a standard 5-star Erudition unit, and as a result is a pretty decent look on what the class does and maybe what it lacks, which is big damage. That's kind of what it lacks, at least initially. Despite being a very popular character, she wasn't considered to be especially good at launch, which is in large part the case for the class as a whole. Of course, this being very early in the game, we didn't really have much of a grasp on what kind of endgame content we'd be dealing with, but it was simply easier to melt elite enemies with characters like Zila, the first banner unit, than it was to use the more AoE-focused Erudition units. If only we had game modes that helped that. Ah well, looking at our 4 stars, we have 3, Serval, Herta, and QQ. I like these characters personally, I still use QQ pretty often today, and Herta, well, she'll have her time to shine later. But while these were all usable units in the fairly weak early game of 1.0, they didn't do much to blow you away. Now that we've got the very, very early game stuff out of the way, let's move on to introducing the star of our show. Now you might be asking, is Jing Yuan our story's protagonist because he carried the class, lighting the way as the first premium Erudition unit to usher in the class's meta relevance? No, he was honestly kind of mid when he came out. People just kind of liked Zila better. And his best-in-slot set wasn't even really that much to write home about, and it was just kind of meh. He was a popular character though, a lot of people, including myself, liked him in the story, so he's a cool guy. But what makes him the hero of the story? In order to answer that question, we have to talk about power creep, which is a very real problem that games like this have. Star Rail being turn-based makes it even more susceptible to power creep, since real-time games like Genshin can do more to differentiate units than just giving them better numbers. Power creep doesn't lead to just stronger units, it leads to beefier health bars, and over the course of several patches, you might see endgame content double the amount of HP it has in a wave. This is, of course, to incentivize you to pull new units, build new units, and not just use the ones you pulled a year ago. But what does this have to do with Jing Yuan? Well, if you watch the Hunt video, you'll remember Topaz getting steadily better as teammates that benefited her and benefited from her debuff were released. Jing Yuan isn't really in the same situation, but, well, I'll just go ahead and try to give you guys a reminder every time our general gets a teammate, relic, or some sort of gameplay change that buffs him and his viability. Much like with the Hunt class, Erudition would have to wait quite a while for a new unit to be added to their roster after launch. Also, a quick fun fact, Erudition and Preservation are the only 2 classes to not have any 4-star units released post-launch, so QQ, Serval, and Herta remain the only Erudition 4-stars for the foreseeable future. Once we finally reach the release of our first post-launch Erudition unit, Argenti, we also already have so much stuff to talk about outside of just our new unit. So before we dive into Argenti's usability and kit, let's catch up on what we missed between Jing Yuan's release and his. Also, if you're wondering why we haven't really gone into detail on any of our Erudition units kits yet, it's because I wanted to reach pure fiction before we did so, because it's pretty important for how the class works. And we'll do that shortly, but it's worth noting that our general has already received a buff or 2 before Argenti or pure fiction were even released. Fu Zhuan, while not a full-on buff to Jing Yuan, does help solve one of his primary issues. See, Jing Yuan is one of the only units in the game to have a Summon. Summons, while counting as follow-up attack damage, take up their own space on the turn order independent of other units. Jing Yuan, Topaz, and Lingsha are the only units to currently use Summons, but that's definitely going to change in the near future for reasons. Jing Yuan has this annoying issue where his Summon is his main damage source, and if he has any kind of annoying, crowd control effects applied to him, that makes his Summon just not move, which basically just means he's not doing any damage, which is not ideal. Fu Zhuan being able to prevent him from being CC'd one time, along with the crit rate buff she gives, can be useful in ensuring his damage actually goes off. I'm choosing to mention Fu Zhuan just because it was really hard to ensure that he could actually attack, when it was just units like Natasha who could only cleanse on skill to, make him not miss. So it's not really just Fu Zhuan, though she is a premier option to use with Jing Yuan. Units like Kuoho as well, who also has useful buffs for Jing Yuan offensively, can help cleanse him as well. So this is more so just Sustain's getting better benefits him more than it does someone like Zila, I would say, because, well, yes, Zila getting CC'd is also really bad, but look, anyone that has played Jing Yuan will tell you that they've gotten CC'd right before the Lightning Lord was going to move. I promise you, it's a very big issue for him, and just know that there being better ways to keep him cleansed or keep him from being having to need to be cleansed in the first place is very important, and the fact that we got units that were better at that is a very big deal to him. Anyway, it's hard to call Fujuan a buff to the general specifically, as she was more just a generally good unit for just about everyone, but what is a buff to the general is the release of the Blazing Follow-Up Attack set. I mentioned before that the Lightning set, his initial best-in-slot set, wasn't really that impressive, and much like Topaz, he was relieved to have a better set that actually could help him do a bit more meaningful damage. Speaking of Topaz, she's also technically a Jing Yuan buff if you squint enough. I know she's a hunt unit and it's a bit different, but given that 7 is follow-up attack damage and it's his primary source of damage, he does benefit from her debuff. Of course, this is much shakier ground as far as synergy goes, considering that her debuff is only on one enemy at a time, but the point I'm getting at here isn't that the game is catered to Jing Yuan or anything, because it most certainly isn't. It's more so that Jing Yuan has always found some way to try and benefit from the way the game develops, whether it's through characters or relics being added to the game. We can already see a handful of things that benefited Jing Yuan before a new Erudition unit was even released, so let's talk about Argenti and more importantly, Pure Fiction. As you already know, the early metagame was taken over by powerful destruction carries like Jinglu and Dan Heng 2. Hey, that rhymed. Jinglu and Dan Heng 2. Huh. Anyway, they were simply the best choice for early endgame content, and destruction just reigned supreme. So good on them, but this video isn't about them, and I didn't realize before, but destruction's actually the biggest class in the game. I always just kind of assume it's Nihility, but I'm pretty sure there's one more destruction unit than there are Nihility units, so I should really be making fun of destruction whenever I'm talking about units that would take forever to talk about, so I don't know. Maybe I need to really think about that. But anyway, we're not talking about destruction today, we're talking about Erudition, which is why we have to focus on Pure Fiction. For anyone that doesn't know, Pure Fiction was the second endgame mode added to Honkai Star Rail. It's focused much more on defeating waves of weak enemies as fast as possible instead of knocking out chunky, elite, and boss enemies. This makes it a great place for units that, who would have guessed, excel in AoE damage. Now that we know what these units are actually made to be good at, let's take a step back and talk about how our starting units actually fared. Starting with QQ, she's not really a good Pure Fiction unit actually, and is much better at MOC than Pure Fiction. She's kind of weird as far as Erudition units are concerned. Since she's so focused on her enhanced basic attack, which is mostly blast damage, she's kind of more of a destruction unit really than an Erudition unit, but whatever. She eats a million skill points and gambles to do damage. One of my favorite units to play, but not really a good Pure Fiction unit. Serval is a fine Pure Fiction unit since she's mostly just straight up AoE damage, and if we were still in 1.0, she'd probably be considered a great option since we don't have a whole lot of choices, but then again, we have more choices now. So she's there and you can use her, but I wouldn't really recommend it. Then we have Herda and Himiko, who are broken. Well, Herda's broken and Himiko is less broken, but still very broken. They are made for this game mode, which is why I didn't really want to talk about them before. These two units were only really considered good for farming calyxes when the game first dropped, but once we had a game mode that catered to their strength, well, now everyone builds them. Both of them have follow-up attack mechanics that the other can help trigger. Herda has a follow-up attack that triggers when an enemy or enemies drops below certain amounts of health, and Himiko gains stacks for her follow-up attack when enemies are weakness broken. Herda is consistently considered to be one of the best Pure Fiction units in the game, which is funny because she's literally free at E6. So everybody has her, they have her maxed out, and everybody can use her. Looking at Argenti, the first post-1.0 Erudition unit, he's mostly made for this game mode as well, given that his kit is about as pure Erudition as anyone else. He's able to launch big AoE attacks with his skill and ult, and also not only does he have the ability to ult at half his max energy, albeit a weaker version of his ult, but he also gains energy based on the amount of enemies he hits with his skill or ult. This makes him even better in content with lots of enemies like Pure Fiction. So how about the hero of this story, good old Jing Yuan? He's, like, okay in Pure Fiction. I know, I've been building him up as this big come-from-behind underdog, but yeah, he's not exactly a top tier in Pure Fiction either. He just doesn't act nearly as often as other characters like Herda, who can have a million twirling follow-up attacks. He's not bad in Pure Fiction per se, since he's still hitting AoE and doing pretty good amounts of damage with his summon, but his Lightning Lord doesn't just act as often as you would like for it to really be this game mode's bread and butter. He's not bad in MOC either, by the way. You can use him there or in Pure Fiction. He's just not going to be top tier in either. He's not up to par with the other Pure Fiction units that we talked about, and in MOC, he's not on par with Jinglu or Dan Heng 2. Yet. Or obviously the other units that would come and power creep those units, because that happens pretty soon as well. I know we took a lot of time getting here and have only just now started discussing just how viable the kits of our current roster are, but telling you how good units like Herda and Himiko were before the game mode they were made for was even in the picture didn't really make a lot of sense to me. It's also worth noting that we've already covered most of the Erudition roster with only 2 units outstanding. And also, our protagonist hasn't really shined the way I've built him up to, yet. I could talk about how 2.0 gave us Sparkle, who was another option to run with Jing Yuan, and gave him some more offensive power, but, well, we'll have time to talk about her and her rather precarious spot in the meta. We'll talk more about that later for sure when we cover Harmony, which we will definitely do sometime in the near future. But instead, let's talk about Jade, because she's Erudition, and this is an Erudition unit. She's an Erudition and follow-up attack unit, much like her fellow Stonehearts, Topaz and Aventurine, both of whom she can actually work pretty well with. She marks a chosen ally, giving them a speed boost, and then does small amounts of damage whenever that marked ally attacks. She also gains a stack whenever her or her marked ally attacks, and upon reaching full stacks, which is 8, she performs a follow-up attack. This follow-up attack is enhanced further by a buff provided by her ultimate. She also steps on you. So if you like that, then cool, I guess. That's your thing. Her best game mode is also Pure Fiction, which at this point has truly become the safe haven for Erudition units. With her covered, it's time to buff Jing Yuan again. At least, I think so. I know that this isn't just for him, but we can talk about Duran, which is a buff for Jing Yuan and other follow-up attack units if you play them in a particular way. Provided that he isn't the only follow-up attack unit in your team, Duran gives good overall damage buffs to follow-up attack damage and gives a heaping helping of crit damage once enough follow-up attacks have been performed by allies. Now you might be thinking that this one isn't really enough of a big deal to want to talk about in terms of just a Jing Yuan buff. And well, Hoyoverse would agree with that take, because they then immediately released another planar set for him that is now his best in slot. And this one has monkeys! This set literally says if you have a summon, which very few people do, but Jing Yuan does, you just get like almost 50% extra crit damage for free, forever, with 100% uptime. That's it. This set's really good for Jing Yuan. Now, this set is made to set up summon characters that don't exist yet. That's 100%. They didn't just make this because they wanted to buff Jing Yuan. But just as Jing Yuan has done in the past, he takes advantage of it, even though it's not made just for him, and makes him just a little bit better. Our hero is still far from meta, but he's gotten just that little bit of extra power once again. He's not done either, I can promise you that much, but before he pulls one more upgrade out of his hat, let's talk about a unit that actually really grew on me, Rappa. Rappa's the third premium break carrier released, and she kind of fills out the trifecta we have now of having a Destruction, Hunt, and Erudition break effect carry. Rappa's main way of breaking is through her enhanced basic attacks that she gets after ulting. These attacks can break regardless of weakness, which is cool because that, it's annoying when you can't break an enemy. You're just sitting there hitting them with your boot hill attacks, and they're not breaking, and then you feel stupid, but then you still clear anyway, so it's fine. I'm not having a problem, you're having a problem. Anyway, she also gains stacks every time an enemy's weakness is broken, and then consumes those stacks to make the last hit of her enhanced basic attack deal even more damage. Man, if only a character let you just break enemies twice. Then she'd be able to, get twice as many stacks, huh? Nah, they wouldn't make one of those, would they? Anyway, she's pretty good, and I really like using her and Lingshot together since Lingshot can break for Rappa and set up big damage with Super Break and also giving her stacks. So that's Erudition. We made it. Go team. Serval's still hanging around if you want to use her. It's a shame we went to Bellabog so early, because if not, she probably would have been a 5-star and been pretty good, but she gets to be a free 4-star instead. QQ still has Mono Quantum, which isn't great, but hey, it's a team, and that's more than some people have. Herda and Himiko are Pure Fiction mainstays. Jade and Argenti are great premium options to help you clear Pure Fiction. And then there's this guy. This almost out-of-place unit we've been paying so much attention to on our journey throughout the game. What's the payoff here? I mean, sure, he's gotten some real material buffs in both relics and teammates, but what has that done for him? I mean, really, what has that done? His Lightning Lord just doesn't move often enough, and, well, I don't see how to fix that unless we make a really overtuned support that provides action advance to Jing Yuan and his summon, and also just gives good general damage buffs at the same time, and that would probably be what he would need. Oh, wait. Yeah, no, that's what they're doing. So with Sunday right around the corner, Jing Yuan is finally getting the last piece of the puzzle. A summon support that will help him rise to the top. Despite being a 1.0 unit, he'll be meta for at least one patch, I can guarantee you that much. Thanks to how broken Sunday is going to be for him. And other units, I'm sure, but those other units don't matter right now, because half of them probably don't exist yet. Now, will better summon-based damage dealers come out after Sunday is dropped? Absolutely. But for one patch, at least, power creep will have happened in reverse and brought Jing Yuan to the top, or at least close enough to it that he'll be a meta pick for at least 1 or 2 rounds of endgame content. After all this time, he'll be meta, unless they nerf the shit out of Sunday, which would be really funny, and I don't think they'll do, because he's in beta right now. I know this video is a little different than the last 2, by the way, since I focused so hard on Jing Yuan, but it's just really funny. He has this story of being a unit that, on release, even though there weren't that many units to really compete with at the time, wasn't considered to be an incredibly powerful unit. I mean, he was good and usable, but he was far from broken. And he still is. He's steadily gotten better through very marginal increases with better relics and somewhat better teammates here and there. And finally, with Sunday being a dedicated summon support and fixing the one issue that he's had that he's never been able to fix of having Lightning Lord never move when you want it to, he's going to be good for at least a patch or two before they release broken support, or broken damage dealers, excuse me, that Sunday works better with. But yeah, that's what we got. I know this video, once again, a bit different, but I think it's a fun study into how power creep works and sometimes doesn't work. Who knows? Maybe any unit can be saved. Except, like, Arlen, I guess.